Oi, gente, tudo bem? A gente tá aqui com a Anne Bogart. Um prazer enorme tê-la aqui no Instituto. Eu sou Gustavo Blaauw, sou fundador e diretor aqui do Instituto Periactus. E hoje a gente tá com essa convidada ilustre que não precisa de descrição para introduzi-la, mas como é sempre o nosso praxe aqui nas minhas conversas abertas, eu gosto do próprio convidado se apresentar. Então, Anne, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. Antes de a gente começar, para quem quiser ativar as legendas automáticas no YouTube para conseguir assistir ao vivo a tradução, é só ativar as legendas automáticas, mas depois essa conversa vai ser publicada em português. And such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your time, for your energy, for everything that you have given us so far. But as I was talking in Portuguese, and you probably didn't understand, I love for our guests to introduce themselves. So I wanted to know, like, who is Anne Bogart? By Anne Bogart. How do you describe yourself? Like, beginning, how do you start with theater? How did you? Because I know you did a bunch of courses and you went to do an MFA, which we're going to talk about at NYU. But I wanted to know, like, what was Anne before she knew theater? How was Anne? How Anne discovered theater, and how was that process until you kind of tried to professionalize that?
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you for having me on your. I guess it's a program you've created, right? And I don't speak any Portuguese. It's such a puzzling language to me.
Even for me, sometimes, to be honest.
But who is Anne Bogart? I don't really believe any one person is one person. I think we're all, it's a little bit like they say about mushrooms, mushrooms in the ground, they're all connected to each other. Trees are all connected to each other. I'm a shape made by many influences. But I will tell you this, to answer your question, I've always been a director. I mean, ever since I was 15 was the first play I directed on my own. And I've never really wanted to be an actor, although I admire actors and I'm fascinated by what they do. But I've always been a director. It's a little pathetic. I have no other job, but it seems to be something that I enjoy doing. And I didn't get an MFA from NYU. I got an MA. And it was what's now called Performance Studies. It was a 2-year program that's now a 1-year program. But it was a terrific experience, though, being at NYU for that 2 years, because it was a program run by Richard Schechner. And the approach for all of the people that taught there was anthropology, sociology. So I didn't learn, how to direct a play, because that wasn't what it was about. It's what is a play? What is an audience? How does theater function in the world anthropologically and sociologically? So that 2 years of study made me curious for the rest of my life about how theater functions in the world. So I look at the world through the lens of theater and through the lens of directing.
Amazing.
That's all I've ever done. I'm so sorry. It's a little boring, but
No. I totally get you. And after you finished your MA, what was your next step? Like, because sometimes people are like, I myself, I'm doing my MA, but I have no idea what to do next. So, did you have your life plan? Did you knew what you wanted to do, or was
I
it
always
like?
wanted to direct. No, it's actually started earlier than that. I went to a very bad high school, Liceo, and really, really terrible. But they did plays there, and I ended up directing The Bald Soprano by Eugenie Ionesco, when my teacher who was directing it got sick and told me to take over because I was her assistant.
Oh wow.
So I decided then at the age of 15, I just wanted to be a director. But it took me 4 undergraduates to actually graduate. I went to 4 colleges,
I feel you. I feel you.
because I was not accepted at any of the great ones, because I had a history. I was a hippie, I went to Woodstock, and so I think that got on my record. So no college wanted to take me. So I went to
Are you
4
serious? Would they put that in their record if you went to Woodstock? That's so amazing. That's so
Yeah, it
funny.
was a terrible school, a really,
Oh
really
my
bad.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, well, I did sell a few drugs from my locker at school. So,
I
I mean,
love
it
it.
was 19, I mean, it was 1967 through 69 when it was,
You're
it was
living in the counterculture moment, so
the
what
hippie. I
else to
was
do?
a classic hippie, yeah. But but when I finally finished my fourth undergraduate, I had a teacher. It was at Bard College, a great college, which I really loved, who said, "Well, what you do is you go to New York, you get yourself a writer and a company, and you get to work." So I thought, "Oh, okay, that's what I'll do." So I went to New York and had a series of really silly jobs, doing many things to make money. But at the time in 1974, which is when I moved to New York, it was very inexpensive. And lofts, you could get loft spaces. I moved into a loft that had 3 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, and a big dance studio for $325 a month. So each of us
Yeah,
paid $100.
a
Yeah.
very different New York. Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm supposed to now get a company and a writer and get to work. That's what my teacher told me. So I asked around in New York City. I said, well, how do you find actors? And I had been doing directing all through college. I mean, every year I directed a lot, um, but I couldn't get a job in New York because it was just a college resume. So somebody said, well, you put an ad in Backstage, which is a magazine newspaper for actors. So I put an ad like this big in saying actors interested in assassination and murder using Shakespeare's Macbeth, call this number. And the phone started ringing. It was terrifying. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actors called and wanted an audition. And but half of them hung up when I told them I forgot to put in there was no money. I didn't have any money.
Oh, yeah.
Half of them hung up. The other half wanted to audition. So I asked them to come in one at a time. And because we had a dance studio, I sat behind a table holding the table so they couldn't see that I was shaking because I was so nervous. I was 22 years old. And they would come in and I would sit behind the table and do an interview with them. And then I would, for some reason, ask them to read a poem by Sylvia Plath. I have no idea why, what that had to do with that. But I just remember this one guy comes in. He's twice my age, or maybe more. I look at his resume. He's got Broadway, off Broadway, off Broadway, film, television. He's done commercials, everything. And his breath smelled a little of alcohol, and he started to cry. And he said, "I just want to do something that means something."
Wow.
And I was so moved. And from that moment, I felt like I had looked into the Pandora's box of what it means to be an actor in New York. And I suddenly had such deep respect for actors and admiration for actors. But that's how I started in New York. But I couldn't get a theater. As I said to you, I would go to all these little theaters and I'd say, "Can I direct here?" And they would look at my resume, which was college shows, and they go, "No, sorry." So I started directing on rooftops, in shop windows, in my own apartment or loft, wherever I was. Because after that, I moved to a brownstone in Brooklyn near Brooklyn Academy of Music, which at that time was very, very bad neighborhood. Again, $325 a month for 3 floors. And you share that. And I ended up doing plays in that house, bringing people to Brooklyn, which was not hip then, in a truck that a friend had, to Brooklyn. But and it was around that time I thought, well, I'd really love to get, why I keep correcting you about I didn't have an MFA. I knew that if I applied for an MFA directing degree, I wouldn't get in because I had not gotten into all the other schools. So instead of applying for an MFA, I applied for this academic program, which was theater history and criticism, that later became performance studies, which was the best thing I ever did. But sometimes, Gustavo knows very well that I run the directing program at Columbia University. And when I'm reading the applications, I think I would not have gotten into my own program. It was really hard to get into. But so it was after a couple of years of being in New York as a young person that I actually went to grad school, and I continued to have a lot of really different kinds of jobs. I worked to make money to pay the rent. I worked in an after-school program for the United Nations School. I worked as a expense analyst on a Wall Street brokerage firm. I worked in a halfway house for schizophrenics. I had all kinds of jobs. But then after I finished at NYU, I thought, well, I can't live in New York. I mean, I'll never get, work in New York. So I applied to teach in many universities around the country, but in those days it was pre-internet. I would write letters. I never heard back from anyone. And then one day, a man by the name of Ron Argelander, who founded the experimental theater wing at New York University, said to me, would you like to work at the experimental theater wing called ETW? It still exists today. And I said, what would I do? And he said, well, I see all of your shows downtown that you do all over the place. Do that. Do that with undergraduate students at ETW. So my first 7 years I worked for 7 years working at NYU. But what I would do is I earned enough money from working at NYU to do my own shows. And I would work with the students since I didn't know what to teach. We would just make shows. We made lots and lots of shows, and a lot of people came to see them, sometimes completely sold out, and it created a lot of events. So it not only could I think that was my graduate training, actually, is teaching for 7 years. I really learned a lot, and I was able to afford to live in New York. And then I went through a period of years where I tried not to be American, North American. I went to Germany and worked in all the German-speaking countries. And through those experiences, I found out that I am a North American, that I have that sense of humor, that sense of structure. So it was always directing, to answer your question, and always just making things, always not doing readings, or I didn't really believe in the corporate ladder to directing, which I don't think really exists. But
in your point of view, which is this corporate ladder? Because many people don't know.
well, some people think that the corporate ladder is you assist other directors, and little by little you get to be able to direct something small, and little by little big. I think you have to start off the bat and direct something big, but maybe on a rooftop, and bring an audience to see it and figure out how to work with actors. So that's how I run the directing program at Columbia, is that the directors have to direct all the time. And as you know, Gustavo, because you've been involved in that, have an audience see it every week, see their new production.
Full flash productions, costume lights. It's amazing.
Yeah, you were involved with that, Gustavo. You should describe how that goes a little bit.
Oh, it's just amazing. It's every week. We have a black box, and every week it was a different team. I still remember three, which was my favorite. We did the semiotics one. That was a really fun exercise. Of course, the site-specific one was just great. And I always remember that one exercise with Marina that we went. Marina is one of N's students. That we went to that basement level. I don't know what the department level, and we got kicked out because we didn't have performance space to do it. Marina wanted to do this crazy thing, but yeah, it's what I was very surprised was, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit about it, was the feedback process. Because I love, because after we do how it works, right? We do all the students, we pause in between so they have time to set up, but we don't give feedback to them in between. It's all the next class, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So Yeah, or in the end, if we have time, which that time I participated in the feedback. So I wanted to talk about how do you kind of run your feedbacks because that was so different for me, closing your eyes and all that stuff. Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is that with the each year at Columbia, there's 6 directors. So they do start. We have they show work for 3 hours on the Monday, say in my class, and on Wednesday they get intense feedback. On the Monday, we encourage there to be a lot of audience, get people in, like put on a show every Monday. On the Wednesdays, it's simply us in the room looking at each of the 6 projects and being and critiquing them. But it starts with, as you said, you close your eyes and just what do you remember? Because a lot of teaching, directing is like, well, what did you intend and did you get it? And actually, that's okay. And that's part of it. But a whole other part is what did you create that we remember? Like what images do we remember? Like I think you think of yourself as a lily pond, and what are the lilies that rise up? What comes up through the pond? And quite often, the memories that you've created in your colleagues or in me is more important than what you were intending. That there was a why is it that it mattered the way someone's hand lay on a bench? Oh, let's look at that. So it's a combination of intuitive looking and also rigorous uh, looking at the tools that you have as a director to create work. So the whole first semester that you were involved so much in, Gustavo, was each week, as you said, semiotics or site specific, that you were looking at different tools that a director has in their toolbox. So by the end of the semester, they've taken out all the tools and looked at them and can examine them closely. But those
What do you say are? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no,
No, no.
those 3 hours of critique are sacred because it's not with anybody watching. You know,
Yeah.
it's really looking at each individual and saying, not just me giving feedback, but your colleagues, the other directors also saying, why did you do this? Or this is what moved me, or I was appalled by this, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were going to say something.
No, yeah, I was gonna ask, what are those elements? What are those that you teach? I think it's 12 weeks. I don't know, but what do you think? Do you think are the most important elements or tools that a director has to have nowadays, especially considering what you teach in those weeks?
Well, you look at it non-hierarchically, because if you say in many theater process, you say, well, the text is most important. Well, maybe not. Maybe the text is as important as is the architecture, as is the space, as are shapes, as is the tempo changes. We try to look at all of the different building blocks that make for a theatrical experience. But sometimes I joke and say, well, there's 15 secrets to making great theater. I don't know if there's 15, but it's things like revelation of space, revelation of object, revelation of character, surprise entrances, offstage action, things like that just come from the history of theater. Um, but as you were saying, like, how do you look at semiotics and apply it to how you think of creating meaning on the stage? What is character? What is a relationship? How do you express it? Is it just by two people talking to each other, or is it expressed spatially or temporally? So we try to look at all the different elements that make up the theatrical experience.
Amazing, amazing. I think we need to talk a little bit about how you uh, continue your company and because you started right with the backstage uh, inquiry, and then I wanted to know how do you came about creating with Suzuki the city company from that. So can you tell me about that story until you met him, how you met him, how was that process?
That was many years later. I mean, it was in 1992. It was his idea to start a company. And when I first met him, I mean, I went to his um, I went to Togamura, where he has a theater compound, a really glorious theater compound up in the mountains of Japan in what they call the Japanese Alps. And he was looking for a partner, an American partner, and I seem to have won the prize. Um, and in the end, he helped me start the company. And he said in the beginning, I'll help you for the first 4 years, but then I'll have other things to do. And so we were together as a company for 30 years. The first 4 years, we would go to Japan every summer and come back to the States and perform in Saratoga Springs, but we all lived in New York City. The City Company is the name of the company. And
Hmm.
we were together for 30 years. And towards the end, just before COVID, we went back for the first time in decades back to Togamura with a production. So it was like a full circle. And Suzuki was always completely supportive of us and helpful in starting the endeavor. So it was, and he's a bit older than I am, so I always looked up to him as example of how he managed his company and could pick and choose as to what I wanted to borrow from him and which I didn't want to borrow from him.
Yeah, interesting, so interesting. And how was the first 4 years and developing this company? And because then we started with Viewpoints a little bit later. I wanted to know how was once you got this. What was in your mind? I was like, okay, what can I create with this? What do I want to do? So did you
Well,
have something in mind, or just you were just throwing yourself out there?
when we talked about starting something, because we're both directors, and you know that famous movie quote that says, "I've got a barn, let's put on a show." I can't remember what movie that's from, but essentially, Suzuki had a barn. I mean, he had a huge theater complex in Japan, and I had chosen Saratoga Springs, upstate New York, as a place where there's theaters. And so we started by making shows together. He would make a show and I would make a show, and then we would bring it to New York for the first 4 years. We'd make it in Japan and then bring it to New York. But no, what I brought to the table was the Viewpoints, which is something I'd been working with for many years. And he brought the Suzuki training, and he wanted American actors to be in my company who had the Suzuki training already under their belts. So, and I brought the Viewpoints training, and somehow that the merging, we didn't merge them, they're parallel, seemed to be a magic combination. The actors who train in both, they're both quite different, seem to be able to access things in ways that then were discovered by the rest of the world. I mean, a lot of people now teach Suzuki and Viewpoints together because it's effective, because you have the strong discipline of the Suzuki training, and then the ability to deal with space and time spontaneity in Viewpoints. So bringing those two happened the very first summer we were in Japan, and that became the foundation of the company. And very soon afterwards, we started as a summer endeavor, but all of the actors in City Company lived in New York, so we thought we should be year-round. But the actors had a meeting very early on in the first year, and they said, "What does it mean to be a City Company actor?" And they agreed, it means we train together. And that was renewed every year for 30 years. That's what it meant to them. That training was basic to their sense of belonging to that company. So.
Totally. And you mentioned Viewpoints, and I mean, I have your book here translated to Portuguese, and Viewpoints here in Brazil as Suzuki too is huge. And I wanted to hear a little bit from you. What is Viewpoints for those who don't know? And why is it important for anyone to know, not just an actor or a director?
Well, I didn't invent it. I learned from the choreographer, Mary Overly. We both taught at ETW, NYU, and she comes from the dance world. Specifically, she came out of the late Judson Church era, which was a very important moment in performance history in New York, where a bunch of young dancers got together and decided to start over, to disregard Balanchine, and even to diss their own near contemporary excuse me, Merce Cunningham, and to start from zero. So if you cross the stage, is that dance? You know, if an elephant waves its trunk, is that dance? And out of that, I mean, those were young people who then became very famous, including Trisha Brown and Yvonne Rainer and David Gordon and Twyla Tharp. You know, they all became super famous later, but they were in their youth doing that. Mary Overly came into the latter part of the Judson Church movement. It was called the Judson Church movement because they got a space in Judson Church on Washington Square. And I'm just getting over bronchitis. I'm going to have a cough sweet.
I feel you. I have cough inflammation, throat
Yeah,
inflammation.
it's going
Horrible.
around. Terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah.
So,
But so you're speaking about Marielle.
Mary had uh, because was a real innovator. She started asking herself, what are the what are the elements of performance? And she came up with ended up calling the 6 viewpoints. And when in 1979 was when I met her and we worked together and we co-directed some things together. She choreographed some things and she showed me her work on the 6 viewpoints. And I was completely blown away because unlike the theater world, where actors wait for a director to tell them what to do, working in this approach, the actors make the first stroke on the canvas. So I immediately took her work and in her opinion, sometimes bastardized it. I changed it a lot. I developed it. I developed many more than 6 viewpoints. I came up with 9 and then added the vocal viewpoints, much to her chagrin. At times, she was quite angry about it because I used the word. Probably I should have changed the name. I have a new name now. If I were to start over, want to know what
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
called? It's called embodied problem solving. In other words,
I love
solve
that.
problems. Well, yeah, it says
Yeah.
everything in it. So
Yeah, it does. It really does. I love that. I love that. And why do you think it's important for anyone to know this? Anyone that works in the theater? Because I've had people from lighting designers who read your book and changed their way of kind of designing and even architecture, especially the scenic designers. So, why do you feel it's still important for everyone to know this? Because I know when an actor knows viewpoints and when they don't. Because I'm the same thing. I don't even the first rehearsal. I don't have any. I have blocking prepared, but I don't give them anything. But I know which actors are like reluctant to kind of be in the flow, right? So I just wanted to hear from you, like if I was dealing with an actor that is kind of doesn't want to engage, and how do I can explain to them why this is important?
well, actually, a couple of weeks ago, a publisher sent me an article that somebody had written about Mary's work, about Mary Overly's work. And I read something that I had never known before, where she told that person, she said when she was working with a company around the end of the Judson Church era, she was in a company of dancers, and they were asked each to come up with a solo dance. And so Mary apparently said, oh, I'm going to do mine outside near this wall or, outside. So she brought everybody out and she performed. And somebody said to her, you have no idea that there's a wall behind you. You just put this dance anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. And apparently Mary just really thought, that is so true. I didn't know there's a wall behind me. And so to answer your question, as an actor, do you know there's a wall behind you? Do you know what somebody just did over there? How aware are you of the basic shapes in the room? So it makes you conscious of all of the elements that make up performance.
Yeah, totally, totally. Wow, couldn't say it better, of course. But and I've always been intrigued. How do you approach a text, or like you just premiered La Mama Existentialism, which you co-wrote and you co-created with I'm sorry, I forgot the company.
Talking band, yeah.
Yes, and I wanted to know like what gets you to want to do something like, and once you get to that point of okay, I'm doing it. How do you start your process? Are you like a very of course, it depends on the project, but do you really like focus on the text before rehearsal, or you don't even bother about that? I wanted to know how do you deal with a material before starting it and when you start it. How do
Well, I
you?
always do a lot of research, and that's part of the great pleasure of being a director. But in terms of existentialism, Paul Zimmett and Ellen Maddow, who were the founders of Talking Band, I had done a show with them in 1988. It was kind of wonderful show. It was a show called No Place, No Poetry. It actually had a long title, but I can't remember it because the idea was looking at Bertolt Brecht. I wanted to do a project about the theater. And I said that the rule was the text could come anywhere from Brecht, but not from plays, not from poetry. Like it had to come from his theoretical text. So the title, which I can't remember, was, we just called it No Plays, No Poetry, but was something like No Plays, No Poetry, but philosophical manifestations, blah, 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 different things. Anyway, so I had done a show with them in 1988. Meanwhile, at the end of COVID, they came to me and said that they would like to commission me to do a show with their company. And City Company had just closed. But I admired them both. It could have been any number of actors. And so we went out to dinner together, the three of us, and they said, we'd like to commission you to do a production with Talking Band. And I looked at the two of them. This has never happened before. I looked at the two of them. I pointed at Paul and I said, Jean-Paul Sartre. And I pointed at Ellen and said, Simone de Beauvoir. I mean, I've admired those two, but I've never spent time with them. And then I
Yeah,
said, not only that, I also know the title and I know the set design. This is just like looking at them. This is not usual. I said, the
yeah,
title is existentialism. And the set design came from a story that Mary Overley, coming back to Mary Overley, had told me in 1979. She moved to New York City well, she was from Montana and then she went to California. She moved to New York City in 1972, and she moved into a huge loft space in a loft building that was squatted. In those days, artists just moved into these massive buildings that were storage units. What do you call them? Where trucks leave things. And they would take them over, warehouses.
yeah.
And so she lived on one floor, and a bunch of artists, I think Laurie Anderson lived on one floor, different people lived
Oh,
on other floors. And
yeah.
below her, she told me the story, lived a brother and sister. They were artists. And she didn't know them. And one day she wanted to borrow some milk or sugar or something. She needed to borrow something. So she went down one flight to where the brother and sister lived. She knocked on the door, and the door pushed open. And she walked into this space where this brother and sister lived, and it was huge, black sooty space, black and sooty because it's where warehouses had stored their boxes or what have you. Big empty black space. And in the middle of the space were two little houses, white houses, surrounded by white picket fences. And the brother and sister each lived in one of the houses.
Wow.
And I said, that is our set. Because Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir never lived together. They were a couple, a very interesting couple where she procured women for him and he, yeah, anyway. But they never lived together, but they met every day and worked together. They would meet in cafes. So, to answer your question, that all happened in a split, over the course of a dinner. But then I had the pleasure of at least 8 or 9 months of studying Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and that is the great joy, and collecting text and dreaming. That for me is sacred time. So when we started rehearsing it, we all had been studying and preparing and thinking and knowing what the set design is and meeting with the designer, and then you just start to work. So that's off the process of deciding so fast, but always the decision about what the project is a physical one, and you get I can tell whether it's a project I want to work on by whether or not, as the French say, you get frisson de corps, which is in English um, is goosebumps. What is that in Portuguese?
A gente arrepia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I won't do a project unless I get the frisson de corps. Just thinking about it, being nervous about it, thinking it's a leap I'll have to make, that I can't quite do it. And definitely that when I was having dinner with both uh, Paul and Ellen, who I admire, they're both older than I am, and I thought that it also was a piece about aging, because Paul is 81, and how you go on as a couple, and what happens if one of the couples dies, which is what happened to Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. She was left alone to live on without him. So the piece included that quality as well.
Yeah, incredible, incredible. I wish I could be in New York to see it, but I've seen the images you posted on Instagram, and the imagery of the two houses is just very potent.
Yeah, yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, yeah. Especially you. Oh, now that I mentioned, you work a lot with La Mama, which is as a experimental space in New York for Brazilians who don't know. You've done last year The Beautiful Lady, which was an amazing musical. And how is it working with them? Why La Mama?
Well, I have three things to say. One is a lot of theaters in New York right now and around the United States are in terrible shape post-COVID, really bad shape, spiritually, financially, audience-wise. Everybody's struggling. The leaders are leaving, changes of, and La Mama is the happiest theater in the world right now. I don't get it. They're really crazy. It's not terribly efficient. It's led by, I think, a genius, Mia Yu, who took over for La Mama, sorry, for Ellen Stewart, who was La Mama. So it's a very happy place to work. But the only two shows that I've done there are those two shows, Existentialism and Beautiful Lady. I never worked there before, but the funny thing is that Ellen Stewart, who is La Mama, who founded La Mama and is infamous for her guts, and people love her. She, a number of years ago, they have she when she got a MacArthur grant years ago, she bought an old convent outside of Spoleto in Italy and turned it into a theater retreat, which you can go on to online and see. And it's now a place in the summer, La Mama Umbria, it's called, where people come from around the world to take directing workshops and playwriting workshops, all kinds of things they do there. It's a really lovely place with amazing food. And so she was, Ellen Stewart, La Mama, was instrumental. Before she died, I went there to teach a directing workshop. And at one point, Ellen's put her arms around me in front of everybody in the program and said, "I invented her. She is my baby. I'm her mama." I said, "Ellen, I couldn't get a job with La Mama. I wanted to work there for years. I've never worked at La Mama," which was true at the point. She said, "No, but you're my baby. I invented you. I discovered you." I said, "Actually, no. As a young director, I went many times to La Mama and tried to get a space or what. I never worked. So after she died, I started working there. So I've only done shows
Interesting,
there.
interesting. All everything happens in its time. It's crazy.
So true. So true. Yeah.
It's crazy. I was, and especially talking about time, I remember because I'm fascinated, and I reread it for the third time. Your newest book, Resonance, at the Art of Resonance, and I still remember you explaining in class for us resonance, and I wanted to hear from you again. And for people who don't get access to this book or don't know English, what is the art of resonance? What is resonance in theater, in art? Why did you want to write this book at first place? And what is it, the resonance that you're talking about?
Well, about 10 or 15 years ago, I was studying neuroscience, and I learned that memory is a protein, and it's formed in the heat of experience. Like, why do you remember certain things? And I realize, and neuroscientists have shown that a memory is actually a thing in your brain, and to to access it, you have to create synaptical ways to reach this memory. But it's created by the heat of emotion and feeling when you experience something, and that's why you remember it. I mean, you've gone to plays where you walk out after the show and you don't remember anything already, right? That's not a successful play. So I've always thought, well, a successful play is a play that creates memories, creates these proteins in the brain. And I've always said, for years, I've said, if the theater were a verb, it would be to remember, to put the parts back together, and that our job is to remember people who've died and who didn't finish their sentences, and we're here to finish the sentences. So all that was fine until I was in conversation with my dear friend Leon Inglesrud, who's a big Minnesotan, comes from Minnesota, speaks fluent Japanese. That's a long story I won't go into. Anyway, but he's a dear friend, and his mother's had Alzheimer's. And we were talking once, and he said, well, what about my mother? She can't create memories. What's the theater for her? And I went, oh my God. That is such an important question for somebody who can't create memories. And then I started realizing when I thought about it that I'm a big reader. I read a lot. But quite often I'll read a book, and then 2 weeks later, not only can I not remember what I read, but I can't remember the title of the book.
I feel you.
And yet I love reading, right? And then I realized, actually, it doesn't matter that I can't remember, but what happens in the moment that I'm reading is resonance, that I resonate with the material. And so in terms of Leon's mother who has Alzheimer's, that the resonance that happens in the moment of experience is even more important than the memory that you create. And therefore, I started becoming interested in the notion of resonance. Resonance that happens in music is about a certain kind of resonating, a wood resonating against but it's also in the body, and the creation of resonance, or creating the circumstances for resonance in the theater, is probably the most key and most important activity that you can undertake. So I wrote that book to look at the notion of resonance.
And if a director is directing a scene, how can they keep their eyes on resonance, or how can they read resonance? I don't know how to put it, but how can they be aware of that?
Well,
And if that's going on?
no, it's actually it's totally physical.
Hmm.
So my job as a director is I am the first audience member. I am the person that the actors test what they're rehearsing on me. And they actually can feel my response. Do you know, in the olden days, when you wanted to see if you're pregnant, you peed on a piece of paper, and then you waited to see if the paper changed color to see if you're pregnant. Well, in a way, I'm like a litmus paper. I'm there in rehearsal, and the actors pee on me. And then they try to see if I'm changing color. That's my job, is to either resonate with what they're doing or not. If I don't resonate, it's a dead space. So they're actually trying to help to create resonance with me. And then, comes a moment called previews where I step back and give it to the audience. But until then, it's just me. I'm their litmus paper that they're trying things on.
I love that metaphor. I think that explains it. Oh yeah, that's amazing. Just because we're almost out of time, man. Time does fly. I wanted to get some questions from the audience who is with. Prazer enorme tê-la aqui no Instituto. We getting some feedback. Let's see some questions from the audience, and I particularly like this one, and I also want to ask you this: what do you feel what do you do when you feel exhausted, or when you feel like uninspired, or I don't want to do this, I don't want to read, I don't want to, like those days sometimes when we wake up and I don't know, it's not the best days to be creative. Do you have?
I just had that period of time in the last month because I think maybe it's like long COVID or something. I just went through a period where I couldn't, it was not that I was exhausted, I was a little sick, but whether you're sick or not, there's times, as there is in the seasons, there's a time to bloom. And how's that song go? A time to, uh, a
Oh, I
time,
know.
it's Bob Dylan turned it into a song, but it comes from the Bible, I think. You have to find time of nothingness. You have to find time of arid soil. And so I think it's important to allow yourself to feel nothing. I mean, that happens every time I'm working in a new space. I go and sit in that space to figure out how to use it. And first I go, I have no ideas, I'm tired. And then little by little, the space starts to speak to you and you start to listen. So you try to create a conversation, but I think there are periods that just need to be fallow. And I think that it's important not to fill yourself always with distraction, but to allow yourself the emptiness so that you make space for new inspiration.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful said. Beautifully said. We got another question here that I like. What role does the artist?
I want to hear a question you don't like.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah. There's really good questions. Let's see. Oh, here it
Do
is.
another question that you like.
How? Okay. How do you read a play?
Oh, I find plays the hardest kind of literature to read because I think they require an investment of imagination, and I read them very, very slowly, and I avoid reading them for as long as I can. And I love reading. I read a lot of nonfiction. I find plays very, very, very difficult to read because they demand that you slow down. It's like poetry's hard to read too, because
Yeah.
you have to slow your entire metabolism down. So I avoid it as long as I can, and then I read very slowly and get frustrated because I read it too slowly. I'm a fast reader normally, but I read slowly.
I feel you because with plays sometimes I want to like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and read the first act and then I'm just gonna leave the play when I finish the first act if it's a classical play or something, and I never can do it because I take like 5 hours to read like an act.
And I feel bad for the playwrights too. Will send me a play and I'm like, oh
Oh no.
gosh. I mean, I love plays. Obviously, I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't love plays, but it's a real investment, I think.
Yeah, totally. Well, amazing. To finish our talk, I wanted to hear from you. What do you think, like, what do you see in the future of theater, especially with all those new technologies coming in, AI and all those, all those new methods of poetics and expression? How do you see theater? in 20 years? Like,
Well, I think that, and since COVID, although COVID's still with us, I think we've learned about the essential importance of the community that gathers to experience theater together, which is the actors in the audience, whatever technology is included, but that's the sacred line in the theater. And I will quote my favorite quote in the world, ever, 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 came from an interview with the great pianist Alfred Brendel, who's known for his Beethoven sonatas. And he said in an interview that he'll be in concert with an audience, and he'll get to the moment before the final chord of the Beethoven sonata, and he lifts his hands and silently asks the audience how long they will let him wait before he plays the final chord. And when I read that, I said, that is why I'm in the theater. And the more you bring in technology, the more that sacred line is at the heart of the theater, the breath that is exchanged between audiences and actors, and that's what interests me the most, and I think that will carry us far.
That's good to hear from you. And for your future, what do you see you like? What works are interesting you most, and what is grabbing you? Because you seem to love philosophy. I don't know if I'm wrong, but what does inspire you most to continue working in the theater?
Oh God, Gustavo, I'm so sorry to tell you, I'm like an old director cliche. I love opera. I love opera. I love doing opera. I've done a lot of opera. And my
Opera.
dream is to become a little old lady opera director who's carted around the world. And I'll just go,
I love that.
I
I
love
love
being in
that.
I love being in the room with an orchestra and with singers.
I
It's
feel you.
that's my dream. A
So
little
yeah,
old,
let's
a
hope
little
we
old
see more.
lady opera director.
Let's hope we see more operas directed by you then. I'm sure we will. And again, thank you so much for your time, for everything that you've done for us. And again, it's such a pleasure to talk to you and to have this time with you. And I hope we meet again in person so we can talk more.
Oh, we will, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more after we are done with our things now that are coming up, so we can try to bring you in some way to Brazil, even if it's the play. I'm really interested in bringing existentialism, but we'll talk about that later. Guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and again. I don't know what else to say. I would kiss your feet if I could now. But thank you so much. And
Good luck with
well,
your visa, getting your visa.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I'm trying to get that. Trying to get that to go back fully and not just sporadically. But yeah, the first thing I would do is go see you.
Okay.
But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Anne. I appreciate you. And have a great night, everyone.